Hello and welcome. I'm Steve Clemons, editor-at-large of The Hill. Thanks for joining us today for the second in our two-part series, and I really care about this series, called Rebuilding the Federal Workforce. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Nokia, for making this timely conversation possible. In part one, we identified issues that have arisen in recent years from the federal workforce experiencing a steep loss of senior talent, I would even say mid-talent, and subject matter experts. This afternoon, we're going to explore pathways the Biden administration can take to hopefully attract talent back and inspire a whole new generation to participate in public service. It's going to be a tough hill to climb. We will also examine how agencies can be re-equipped with funds and resources to meet the needs of this time. And to help us do that, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers. In fact, for me, it's a bucket list lineup of speakers. But before we get underway, a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at The Hill Events, all one word, all The Hill, at The Hill Events, and using the hashtag TheHillGov, G-O-V. We're broadcasting live. We'll be taking your questions throughout the program. I love your questions. And if you experience any trouble with the live stream, click refresh, and it should take care of things. We begin the program with two leaders who have had a front row seat to federal personnel matters and a presidential transition. Andy Card, one of the people I most respect in this town for really decades, and I don't want to age him because he's a great guy, is the former White House Chief of Staff for President George W. Bush, ran the Auto Manufacturers Association. I have a long history with him that he doesn't know about, but it's really, really great to have Andy Card on here. And Clay Johnson is the former Executive Director of the Bush-Cheney transition, former Assistant to the President for Presidential Personnel, and former Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget. Look, I want to thank both of you for joining us today because, you know, this is sort of one of those wonky topics, but it's so vital and important because a government, as I learned from listening to Andy Card, is only as good as its people and its interaction on issues and challenges. So, Andy Card, it's great to see you. Clay, great to see you. Let me just start with Andy and ask you for a moment. You know, you've sat and you've presided over transitions in personnel, and I assume there's always some issue of which way the wind is going to blow that hits people in government. But when you look across the government right now, without casting blame, maybe we'll do that later, there's just a thinness in expertise across a lot of key parts of government today. So if we were to bring you both back into government and you were going to entice and seduce people to come back, what would be the first things you would do? Andy?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Steve, for having me on, and thank Nokia for sponsoring this. And yes, you trigger a lot of great memories, and it's not PTSD, so thank you very much. With regard to, the backbone of our government are the career public servants. And yes, unfortunately, our democracy has been tarnished for the last 4 years, and it needs to be polished. And of greater significance is the tarnishing of our democracy also had a tendency to reduce the number of people who are willing to go into career public service and really work for the government. The backbone of our government are really the career public servants, especially the leadership of the senior executives in service, the SES crowd. And I want to do all I can to help people recognize that the people who are working in the government, not working in the White House, are the ones that really implement all of the policies that are made at the White House. And so if they're not doing their job, our government doesn't work. And so, yes, I would be out there polishing the noble call of public service, encouraging young people to sign up to become civil servants, public civil servants. It's a great career because you make a difference. And the truth is you get to make a difference by seeing how the policies that are being implemented work. And that knowledge is helpful at advising those political appointees that come in that may have a great idea, but it won't work because the people in government say, we tried that years ago and it didn't work. You want to try it a different way or do it something else. So it's a good path for people to take if they want to make a difference in basically helping other people in the United States and around the world. And I do encourage people to, take a look at public service. Not necessarily the political aspects of it, but the really make a difference public service. And right now, I'm sure the folks at the White House are focusing on who in government really does their job well, and how do we get them to help us know what we should be doing to help them do their job well.
Oh, thank you for that. I mean, that's really a great place to start. And Clay, on the first segment that we did this, a month or so ago, we had someone tell the story of President George H.W. Bush, and I think I have this right, and it may have been George W. Bush, who went very early in his administration and went over to the Constitution Hall and essentially met with, department heads and deputy department heads and said, I value you. I value what you're doing. Here's what we want to do. And really connected with those people that we kind of call the bureaucracy, but basically said, we can't do that. And I haven't heard anything like that happening in a very long period of time. Is that the kind of step you think is needed to restore morale and a sense of, what Andy was just talking about, a sense of higher purpose in what's doing, give people confidence that they've got solid grounding again?
Yes, I think that the need is to focus on what is possible to accomplish and whatever the administration is prepared to accomplish. What results, what kind of successes do they want to achieve for the American people? And let's get together and do this because it will make our country better and make it better over in this area and that area. President George W. Bush spoke to a large crowd of SESs at the beginning of his first term and his second term. And I know probably other presidents have done it as well. And it is very well received, and it's fun to be there and watch all this unfold. H.W. Bush and George W. Bush are both pretty good cheerleaders, and they did a good job of getting the crowd going. The key that I found is back me stop for a second. President Bush said to me when I was setting up, this was true in Texas as well. I did the same work for him in Texas that I did in the personnel area in Washington, which was help him identify the best people to come in these senior positions and affect the efforts that they wanted to unfold to accomplish what they wanted to accomplish.
Right.
And focus on results-oriented people that go out and to their job every day with an idea in mind of what success, what outcome they want to achieve in the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and rally their people around it and get them super excited about it, and then promise that there's going to be a big celebration when they accomplish it and so forth and so on, and then do that. So it's not about working at things, not about working at being better. It's about being better and being very results oriented, and to get Congress aligned that way, to get the funding aligned that way, to develop accountabilities and transparencies to drive behavior that way. And then as you reach out to new people to come in, or to old people that have left, or previous employees, and ask them to come back or encourage them to come back, talk about how much more results-oriented this administration or the next administration is going to be, and get them excited about what they will be a part of accomplishing for the country. Because there's, civil service sounds like an administrative state, and an administrative state is not something that would normally be a concept you want to rally the troops around. I think the thing to rally around is what the government could accomplish if everybody focused on it in the right way, and the funding was right, and the management of the personnel was right. Because I think there's huge opportunities to improve the way it manages itself, the government, and the people that come in now and the people that are already in the government can be a part of causing the federal government to be like the American people would really like it to be. That opportunity is the big appeal, I think, that's out there to draw people in. Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of people, rightly or wrongly, have become, look at that administrative state, what you just call administrative, that have turned it the deep state. David Rhodes said it's not a deep state, it's an administrative state, that's there, and, in his book that kind of looks at this. But Andy, I would come back to you and I said, I worked in the Senate. I've known a lot of people in Republican and Democratic administrations, new people, part of the other policy wonk world in think tanks and the Congressional Research Service, people all in the policy world. And if there's one thing I would describe, there's that old William Faulkner line, and when somebody asked William Faulkner how he wrote all those books, he says, I couldn't help it. And, you almost meet policy people who can't help but be the policy people they are. that they're obsessed with some widget, a better idea of doing things, some notion of public. So that notion of what you're just talking about, public services, is there in most of them because they're obsessed with how to get people connected in broadband or how to get health care responsibly, extended across the board, or, any national security. So I guess my question, Andy, is what's getting in, because most people I know who are great policy hands, it's different than politics, are obsessive, compulsive about that. What's getting in the way of them just being unleashed to come back? What are the barriers we have to remove?
I think the greatest barrier is communication. If there's no communication, you feel as if you're not making a difference or you're not relevant. And I can tell you, I could not have done my job as Secretary of Transportation or as a White House staffer or certainly Chief of Staff if it weren't for my recognition that the people that make a difference in how the government functions are the career public servants. So I would always want to ask them, how will this be implemented? Not what is the policy, how will the policy be implemented? Because the definition of policy is really about its implementation. All of us can make up policy. Believe me, everybody wakes up and we can make up policy. But if you don't implement the policy to live up to the president's expectation, let's say, you're not contributing much to the process. And the people who implement policy are the most knowledgeable about the consequences. And if you talk to them, you will identify more unintended consequences, so your policy will be better. So if you care deeply about, like, transportation, for example, I used to count on the career public servant staff at the Department of Transportation to tell me what should a good transportation network look like and how should we implement this policy. And boy, did they make a difference. So yes, if you care about policy, if you have a passion for healthcare, you want to work at the Department of Health and Human Services or the FDA or CDC. You want to do that because you'll be hands-on, you'll be making a difference. The same thing if you're in any other policy area. Find out where your niche is, get in, make a difference, and you will be relevant.
One of the questions that's out there of critics for some of this conversation, Clay, is what biases that administrative state may have. There's an interesting story in Bart Gellman's book about called Angler, the Cheney vice presidency, where he talks about Vice President Cheney calling a very, 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 I call it deeply placed official. I think it was Department of Interior, had to do with a stream and fishing and salmon and construction. But it was unusual that the vice president would reach so deeply into there and then get results, which is not biased, but it shows that there was a kind of level of engagement that many people hadn't seen before, which stood out. But it also raises the question of staffers that come with a different bias in what they do, or different perspective or frame. How do you square that over time? What are the constructive ways to solve some of those problems? Because that is what comes up in the minds of many Americans right now when you talk to them about workforce and the federal government, that it's somehow biased against the executive branch, even though it's part of the executive branch.
Well, let me give you an example of what this has really happened. And follow up, it's kind of a real life example of what Andy was talking about. A bill was passed in Congress to create the Department of Homeland Security, and they were told to stand up, for instance, the Transportation Department, the airports, Homeland Security and airports, in 13 months.
Right.
They didn't. Jim Loy, who was the head of the department, to be the head of the department, was took 6 months and he didn't hire one person. They had to hire 100,000 people. They didn't hire one person for 6 months because they spent that was 6 months deciding what those 100,000 people were going to do. So it wasn't just hire a bunch of people and put them out there. It was to do what? And you needed left-handed people to do this, and right-handed people to do that, and technical people, and whatever. And so it was all driven by a clear picture of what success meant 13 months out. When the question was how to create a safe port, somebody said, how we decide, or we were talking about
right.
Homeland Security in general, and somebody said, let's take a port in New Orleans and figure that out. Everybody looked at each other, the Port of New Orleans, what do you mean? He said, well, a boat comes into New Orleans. This was a career person who was
Right.
talking about this. Posed this question to this meeting of about 30 career people who were there to participate in an effort to decide what Homeland Security should be. What does that mean? What does it mean?
Yeah.
Department of Homeland Security. They decided when a ship comes in, you don't know where it is. You need satellites. You need this. We went through every different scenario. And we finally found one where it required, if you had to have satellite, you had to have this, and you had to have all these kinds of things. In about 20 minutes, everybody looked at each other and said, we just defined what it means to have what a picture of a secure port is.
Right.
Let's get out of here. Let's go get it and make that happen. The career people did that. They
Wow.
were asked to do it, and they stepped up and did it in a fantastic fashion.
Right.
They weren't told, come on, let's go and process some paperwork and so forth. Let's focus on what the picture of success is and keep coming back to that picture and emphasize. The management was encouraged throughout the process, working with the career staff,
Right.
keep coming back to that picture of success. That gets that adrenaline going, and that's what everybody can be proud to be a part of accomplishing.
Thank you for that. Andy, we're right out of time, but I want to ask you just one last question, because you're both talking about, transitions. I mean, this was a little bit into your transition with President Bush, but of course you were chief of staff when 9/11 hit. We saw Barack Obama come in the 2008-2009 financial crisis. We've seen Joe Biden come in with a COVID crisis. And I guess the question I want to just ask you as we wrap this up, along the lines that Clay Johnson was just talking about, how do you keep from becoming a reactive presidency and becoming a strategic presidency, where you've got your stakeholders and you've got your team, where you're not driven by everything hitting and gut-punching you and trying to define you from the outside? As I know you know that topic because you were in the middle of that. How do you prevent that from hijacking the next 4 years?
You have to have, first of all, you have to have tunnel vision, or at least know the people who have tunnel vision that can help you. So you need the experts. But I would argue that the chief of staff's job is to have peripheral vision so that they aren't just lost in a tunnel. They actually are understanding what's the context, what else has to be done at the same time. So I would say, find the people with tunnel vision, make sure they're focusing on that which they should be doing, and then have peripheral vision to understand where you have to be nimble and make sure you can walk and chew gum at the same time. Right now, the anchor for President Biden is actually the knowledge pool that career public servants have. They know what's happening inside the tunnel, and they know what's happening in terms of peripheral vision. So hopefully that knowledge makes its way up into the White House, so they're not just dealing with theory, they're dealing with reality. And the pandemic is the best example. President Biden inherited a horrible pandemic with all kinds of challenges. Getting these vaccines out is going to be a huge challenge. He recognizes the challenge. He didn't have all the information during the transition coming in, but now he has access to all of the information. And it's the career public servants that are the ones that are going to say, this was working, this was not working, we didn't do this, we should have done that. And that's the basis which they have to do. So I'm saying, I hope everybody at the White House respects the need for tunnel vision, but has the courage to have peripheral vision and find others who actually understand what is going on. So that's where the problems are, and that's where you can first fix a problem and find a greater solution.
Well, Clay Johnson, Andy Card. Clay is a former executive director of the Bush-Cheney transition, handled everything in personnel and people and budgets. Andy Card, former chief of staff to President George W. Bush, former secretary of transportation. These are two icons in this question of how you get personnel aligned, as Clay Johnson said, with purpose, and how can you be both peripheral and tunnel. We learned a lot. We couldn't have started today better than we did. Thank you both.
Thank you very much. God bless you all.